Welcome to our panelists here. We're going to get right after it. We have a beautiful dinner set up for later. This is going to be a great topic, and just a quick backstory to this. Tal, I want to thank you for pulling this panel together. Tal's been to our meetings for some time now. We had a conversation a couple months ago. I was trying to tell him what ideas I had, and on some level he just said, I got this from here, let me figure it out. So I'm curious to find out what we're going to talk about today. I think it has something to do with data. We have an amazing group here. And I'm so grateful to all of you for being a part of it, and what a great turnout here at the end of the session. Over to you, Tal. Thank you.
No, thanks, Scott. And we don't know what we're doing here either, so that's fine. So, and it's fun, because when Scott asked me to moderate, I was like, I want to be a panelist. That's much more easy. Being a moderator, you have to think and all that. But thanks for joining. I think what we'll do, and you saw the title, I actually had a much more aggressive title initially, right? Is it fake or real, the data? But now they dial it down, Henry dialed it down. But I'm Tal Wenderow. I'm a venture partner in Genesis. What we'll do is just go around the table, introduce each other. Feel free to share about your company, positions, and this is a free-for-all, right? Open discussion. We're all type A personalities, so let's just have fun.
Okay. Hi, I'm Gwen Watanabe. I'm a managing partner with H.I.G Capital. H.I.G is a private equity firm. We've got $55 billion of assets under management, and I'm one of the partners that run the healthcare fund. Yeah, you.
All right. I'm Tamir. I lead Theator, where we're leveraging data to eliminate variability and disparity in surgical care.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Manisha. Shah-Bugaj. I'm CEO of Activ Surgical. I became CEO in December, and I joined the company about 14 months ago as COO. Activ Surgical, we're leveraging science and data to improve surgical outcomes by providing surgeons with surgical intelligence in the operating room.
Nice. I'm Golshan. I wear a couple hats. I'm a practicing interventionalist with outpatient practice and surgery center. I focus on peripheral interventional disease. I'm the medical director for Braid Health and Braid Medical, which is an AI-enabled teleradiology platform that also helps companies like Walmart with intraoperability and data management and an anonymization of data, so there's less of a potential for a leak. And I also have a stealth medical device company in the peripheral space, which should be 510K cleared in about a year.
Thanks, Ali. Thanks, everyone. I think the also unique thing about the group here is everyone have a different perspective, but also change roles in his life. We have 2 physicians, corporate, startups, and we've all been in several positions. So we'll bring some different perspective. But I want to start with, just the word data, right? How do you define data? What, is it personalized, not personalized? And we don't need to go by order, so whoever jumps first to the mic, we'll get through.
We'll go reverse order.
See? That's what I was talking about.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I'm just the adult supervision.
bus running me over, but very elegantly done. I appreciate it. Crunch, crunch. So I feel like there's an unlimited amount of data, and there's value sometimes in places where you think there might not be value. So I think that it's important to potentially start throwing your net very wide when you're making your list of things that might be data. But then when you're collecting it, you might want to hone down. We were looking at a tech-enabled cardiac platform, and we were talking to cardiologists like what data points matter, right? And so if you drown someone in data, then they don't pay attention to any of it. So if you gather basic things like blood pressure, hypertension, change in body weight, that can give you a lot of information. So start broad, define broadly, but then focus on what you're going to collect so that it's actionable and not overwhelming. That's just my opinion, though.
All right, so, data, what is data? Data is really any input. I think for Activ Surgical, we look at data, we're looking at surgical videos. And for us, when we talk about data monetization, we're actually not actually monetizing the data itself. We're really looking at what solutions can we create through that data and what value can we bring into the OR from the data that we have available to us.
We are going by order.
Oh, okay. So in terms of data, data is information, and so collecting the information that has to do with behavioral, buying patterns, et cetera. I'll give you an example. So I'm on the board of Compute Health, which is Omar Ishrak's SPAC, and we just announced the acquisition of a company called Allurion, which has a balloon that's inserted into the stomach, but it also has an app which registers data, right, so personal data, and monitors things like eating, weight, et cetera. And then there's also the analysis of the data, which can be monetized by selling to what we traditionally don't think of in terms of medtech, but companies such as Weight Watchers, or there's all sorts of different ways to monetize it. And I think as medtech folks, we don't necessarily think of that, but in actuality, that's really probably the most valuable piece of that.
So I'll be controversial. So I think the conversation is cool about data. Our focus at Theater is also around surgical intelligence and really structuring intraoperative performance. But I think the real conversation needs to be around the value that's derived from it, number one. And I also think there's like this concept I like to talk about called DRIP. Everyone in healthcare likes acronyms. So DRIP is data rich, insight poor. I think there's tons of information we're gathering. A lot of it is actually meaningless and not actionable. And I'll give you one example. There's a healthcare enterprise that we are talking to. They know that they have 4 times the leak rate of after colorectal procedures compared to the national average. They have no idea why. They know that they have 2 different hospitals with their logo on them in 2 different states. In one of them, very low complication rate after colorectal procedures, and in another, like very high complication rate and bounce back rate, and they have no idea why. Now, are they gathering data? Hell yeah. They're gathering tons of information. They're gathering procedure times, and they're gathering a ton of data. But it's meaningless because they don't have the time or manpower to make sense of it. And so ultimately, the conversation actually, sorry for this, but doesn't need to be around data. It needs to be around meaningful data. It needs to be around data that is structured. And that is where we, I think, have a real role in doing things that ultimately help, whether it's a clinician or clinical leadership or administrator, make sense of the vast amounts of stuff that they're gathering.
And I agree, but let's go one level below that. Is who owns the data, right? You mentioned about hospitals, physician, cardiology, the patient. Meaning, who actually owns when you interact with these companies, hospitals, and people? Do you own the data? Does the hospital own the data? Do you have to pay for the data?
So I guess it depends who you ask.
I'm asking
the hospitals think that they own the data. So I have a few different perspectives on this. I have the perspective of a doc, entrepreneur, but also as a patient. So my sense is patients own the data. In the legal world today, when we interact with a hospital and we sign an agreement, the hospital owns it. But I think ultimately that's not really the case. And the world that I live in, or what we're doing at Theater, is really for the first time shining light on what actually happens in the operating room. And I can tell you from personal experience, a year and a half ago, I had cancer. I had to go through surgery. It was a very, I don't know, am I allowed to say shitty experience here?
Yes, you can.
Okay, so it was a shitty experience.
It's after 5 p.m. So.
Sorry?
It's after 5
It's
p.m.
after 5 p.m.
Yeah.
Right. So it was a really traumatic experience. One of the things that I realized there was that I have, as a patient, I have access to every chest X-ray, MRI, CT, and then I lay on a bed for 8 hours, anesthetized, I'm unconscious. Someone's moving things around, slicing me open. And afterwards, I have no real documentation of what actually happened in surgery. What I have is an operative report. We all know that's BS, or let's politically correct world, it's an idealized version of what happens in surgery. But I had no real access to my own data. That was mind-boggling, and that needs to change. And that's a part of what we're doing at Theater, trying to push that. But so long answer to a question, but ultimately I think the patient should be the one owning the data. I think that's the entire concept around interoperability. And I think right now there are certain loopholes within policy and legal system that give hospitals a bit of leverage, but I think that should change.
But the anonymized data, the medical device companies need that to be able to improve the procedures as well as collect information about cost savings, et cetera, so that we can, push forward technology. So, I mean, I agree with you. Patients absolutely own the data, but the device companies, I used to run Smith & Nephew's robotics division. We need the anonymized data to be able to improve, fiducial markers and how our software program runs, because if we don't have that, then we're not able to, get the next generation out to improve the procedure for the next generation.
So I don't want to hog the conversation.
You are, but that's okay.
Yeah. So I'll hog, but just for a second.
That's fine.
So all I'll say to that is that there's a difference between the owner of data and then whoever has license to it. And I think those are two separate discussions. I think like the owners needs to be, what I said before. But I think, various companies can have license in order to do what you are, talking
But
about.
I don't think the patients actually knew that they were licensing the data to the robot.
And then what happens when there's a data leak? Because then it doesn't matter who owns the data. If your business associate agreement says XYZ and there's a breach, then you still have obligation to report to the patient. And then you look terrible because they're upset with you. And so that's why the hospital is feisty, because the patient's not going to get mad at Medtronic or Boston. They're going to get mad at the person who's their touch point for the care. And so then that becomes tricky because, it's a disaster. You have to inform people, but then the feds get involved, the state regulatory authorities can get involved. It's like nuclear waste. And so that's why I think healthcare providers and hospitals are like, you can own the data, but you take the liability with it too, And that's why it gets tricky.
Is that your experience, Manisha?
Well, I was going to sort of piggyback on what Tamir was saying around just having access to the data versus ownership, right? So there's one aspect, ownership, who owns it, who has rights to it, and then can you share access? And for companies like ours, we simply need access to the data so that we can build those enabling solutions on top of it. The next question after that, though, is if there is a monetary element to the access of the data, how do you profit share? How do you share in the money that comes? And one of the things we've talked about as an organization is leveraging technology like blockchain. Can you use that to sort of track ownership of data and have transparency so that everyone sort of gets a piece of the pie at the end?
And can you use it to anonymize the data so that it still has value, but that there's no personal healthcare information attached to it? Moreover, like Gwen was saying, complications with procedures, minimally invasive or open, are grossly underreported.
Right.
And so, you'll read about a vein or arterial procedure in Gizmo, and you'll look in the MDR and there will be barely anything in there. But if you're a KOL and people call you with the issues that come up, you're like, things are underreported by 10x. Yeah. And so then if there isn't transparency, then you don't have a true understanding of what the risks and the complications are, et cetera, and we fall behind because then we don't come up with solutions to address those shortcomings.
100%. Like, we need to understand all the failures, because if we don't, then how are we going to, get the next software patch to the robot? We can't. So, but you're right. It's anonymized. And I actually don't think the patients really understand that the data is coming to the medical device company.
So should we all start a company, going to the patient, collect their data, ambushing Ali's clinic and all that? Do you hear that from patients? It's like, where's my data goes? Because I have the same experience with Tamir. My son was sick. I still have MRI CDs in my house that I have no clue what to do. And the only reason I have them because I asked for it. But most patients don't care.
Right.
And especially when you go between physician and one physician to another. Do you see that request from patients?
So HIPAA has been used as a weapon to create data silos. And so regardless of who owns the data, it's who can get access to the data. Nobody can get access to the data. Like, we had a family friend who had a sad situation with a venous malformation, an intracranial hemorrhage, and her daughter was 16, and she wanted to transfer care to Barrows because Lawton's like the best that, whatever he was going to do in the brain. And they're like, it was COVID, and she's in the hospital, and she wants to urgently transfer her daughter. And they're like, well, you can't have access to the records for 2 weeks. That's insane, right? And so the question becomes, is there really going to be a de-siloization of information? Because hospital X will use that to be like, well, you can get all your care here, and then all of your doctors will have access to all of your information. But if you go over there, then they're not going to be able to see your data. And most of it's in Epic anyways, right? Because they're the primary vendor.
Right.
And not that there's anything great or terrible about Epic. I mean, it's a computer software. We're not going to pretend like, it has a soul. I mean, it's, it is what it is. It's a tool, right?
Amazing interface.
A fantastic user. I love it when they're like, the problem is that you should become an expert in Epic. Because
It's a user error.
Epic is the care provider and patient. It's the priority. It's not
What,
the doctor or
$1
the
million?
patient. Exactly. And they'll charge you $1 billion for their old software. But great business model. I mean, you got to respect it. But the reality becomes, how does it look in terms of a reality where there's like an interoperability, a universe where everybody has access to all the data? I mean, it's a big lift, and it's probably not likely to come anytime soon. So then do we create like a gizmo, a widget that helps move the data around to deal with all of the interoperability issues, or does the patient then get their own data in a portable, friendly format? It's a big question, but it's a big problem.
I think the other aspect is like the power of what we as companies do is like, yes, it's important like at an individual patient level, but technology, like the scalability is the important thing. So it's the aggregation of tens of thousands of patients and, being able to connect the dots along all of those. And so, like, it's always funny to me, like when a hospital, like, the hospital sees data as like, as theirs and as their, and so they become the product. It's very interesting, like these conversations, because the power of what we can do, because we're coming from the outside, is connect between, hundreds and thousands of hospital systems where things, some go well, some don't go as well. And we're able to identify, for example, in what we do, I think what you do as well, like best practices, and so that's where really the power of technology comes into play, and where software becomes powerful.
Yeah,
But what's the difference between all the data that's streaming right now from all of our Apple iPhones, and if we were to have that access to that information if we were in a hospital? Like, what's the difference, really?
HIPAA.
Yeah.
I understand it's HIPAA, but I mean, we should be able to have that information
100%.
streaming to our phones if we'd like it, and it's not right now.
We're so far behind.
We are so far behind. 100%.
We use faxes.
But I think the point you made is really critical, because we talk about the value of the patient data. One individual data point from one patient is not all that valuable. So
It's valuable to me if I'm the patient.
Sure, valuable
right?
to
Or
you, but
your son.
But it's the volume
you.
of the data. It's the trends you can find, the insights you can get from that volume. That's really what's valuable. And what
So let
can
me
be
ask you a
monetized.
question about that, right? We all use Google Maps, and it's okay to make mistakes because you're using crowd sourcing about the right path. But worst case, you'll be late by 10, 20 minutes, right? And using all this data to generalize. But as Gwen mentioned, in the end of the day, patients is individual.
Yes.
How do you go back from that macro level in the data to that individual patient to make decision in the OR, for example?
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, I think one of the things we talk about a lot and think about at Activ is we're looking to build AI models. And one of the big things with data is you have to have representative data sets, right? You have to know where the data came from, how is it collected, similar to a clinical study, right? You're not going to get insights from data with a homogeneous population. You need to ensure that your data is heterogeneous and that it is representative, so that you know that the information, the insights you're gaining, the solutions you're creating are applicable to all.
And I'll give you like an example. It might be repetitive for those who heard me talk like a few minutes ago.
I was the only one in the crowd. So.
Were you on another panel?
Well,
Oh.
We still love you. Go ahead.
You came to our
You could be
panel
repetitive.
second? What?
So surgery is an apprenticeship model, right? It hasn't changed for like 400 years. The key component of surgery is making decisions. So if I need like to make a decision on whether or not to do, A or B at a specific point in time in surgery, I do it based on my very limited experiences that I have. Or if I'm lucky, I have someone who's behind my back telling me, all right, do that. What we can do with technology is actually, aid in decisions that are being made in surgery. So instead of me making a decision based on my subjective experience, which is very limited, the future, in our opinion, is overlaying the decision-making junction in front of the surgeon. So not based on your own subjective and very limited experience, but rather on thousands of procedures that are similar. And you can go with decision A or decision B. But based on these thousands or tens of thousands of comparable procedures in different places around the world, this is what happens when you do A. This is the complication rate. This is the bounce back rate. This is the financial implication. And similar with B. You can't do that at an individual level. And that is the power. That is the power of the aggregate and scalability nature of information data that is analyzed.
So we at Smith & Nephew Robotics, we actually had something called Physician Insights, which measured the individual physician's performance, which was so fascinating. So we had metrics in terms of, cuts, this, that, and measured sort of against a pool of physicians. Of course, it was all closed, right? It was not shared with anybody, but they could see their own performance against others, and then how that patient did over time. So that was an individualized example, which was, I think it's huge. I mean, they liked it and they learned from it. Some people don't like that, but.
And the aggregate can also influence the pre-surgical journey too. So if you look at congestive heart failure, the probability of readmission within the first 7 days can be decreased by 50%. Need number to treat is 2. That's really good. By simply having a 7-day follow-up with your cardiologist and medication education and reminders in the first 7 days. So really cheap, really powerful intervention. But the thing is that even the best cardiac programs just recently started things like NP clinics, where if your private practice or your academic cardiologist didn't have time to see you 7 days post-op, 7 days post-admission, they'll see you. But how do they gather the data? I mean, they don't have Bluetooth integrated EMRs to capture this data. And so they're literally asking people oh, what did your home monitor do? Or if it is integrated, it's not automated. So if you use the power of AI and ML to train an algorithm, 1 to trigger and 2 to track, that aggregate then influences that individual's preoperative journey so that you don't need to go under the knife.
Right. Is there such thing as too much data? Both from the data collection, quality, of course, and also how you present that to the user later on?
You want me to talk more?
I want you to talk more.
Go for it.
So, okay, so let's talk about quality of data and the world of healthcare. I have this PTSD from a company that was acquired by Medtronic several years ago called Ardian. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but renal denervation, where they did this huge study. They were acquired for $1 billion. $1 billion, that's a lot. And they were acquired before going commercial, so right after the clinical study. And in the clinical study, they saw you do denervation to the renal nerves, and you're able to drop hypertension. All right, cool. Medtronic acquired this company. The study was conducted in a way that was flawed and didn't address a variety of a variety of folks. Women were underrepresented. Black folks were underrepresented. And then once Medtronic rolled it out, it saw that the results weren't really what they'd seen in this study, if I recall correctly. And so the way that we have been using data traditionally is flawed. Double-blind, randomized control studies, and the way that we've done them for hundreds of years or decades is problematic. The value of data, as we're talking about it today, is in the fact that it's real world. It's not in a clinical study setting, it's in the real world. And we can gather it in huge amounts. And by doing so, we can eliminate a lot of the bias that's inherent in the way that we have been doing things for a very long time. And I think that is crucial. Leveraging technology to eliminate bias so that what we do and what we assess actually has impact in the real world and not like on limited, clinical study settings. So I think eliminating bias is the first real important aspect of it. Obviously, the quality has to be like, top notch. I mean, garbage in, garbage out, with everything. But I think elimination of bias is an extremely important component of like what we're doing today.
Right, but it's also increased patient outcomes. So like remote patient monitoring post total knee surgery. So there are devices that are collecting data on gait, et cetera. And just understanding, if you have an infection or if you're not walking properly or if you're not walking at all, can really, help the intervention. I think you used that example as well. So post-operatively, really intervening early to make sure that, that the rest of the patient recovery journey is actually going to be very successful and positive. So that's a very important component that I see, that also the physicians do get paid for it. I mean, there are codes for remote patient monitoring. It's not a lot, but I'm glad that those codes are there because, if you can intervene early, you can eliminate, to have a revision, for instance, in the total knee scenario.
One way to capture a lot of value is to use a value-based care model, which so far it hasn't been well played or capitalized, but Medicare Advantage is a value-based care play, and it's a big market. I mean, the federal government, we kind of do have a one-payer system between the VA, Medi-Cal, and Medicare. They're the super majority payer. So we're like in this la la land where we pretend that we don't really have a one-payer system. We kind of do, almost. And so Medicare Advantage is half of Medicare, so it's half of the biggest payer, or part of the biggest payer. And if you're at risk for everything, whether you're the pro fees or the global or whatever your arrangement is, if you can save on a readmission for a CHF or a redo on a knee, you're going to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that's how you can monetize it. At least that's an entry point, I think.
Yeah. So switching gears a little bit, Manisha, you have a product out there, limited launch, right? When you go to your customers, so the first question, who is the customer? Who are you selling to? But second, do they ask what data is it generated on? What's the background? Do they actually dig in as a consumer or healthcare providers?
Can you repeat the question? I want to make sure I understand exactly.
So two questions, right?
Yep.
Who is the customer? Who is paying for that? And then do they dig into your product and asking where is the data generated, right? Is it from Israel, India, Australia, US, and
Yeah, I mean, for us, we have, every hospital is different in terms of what their data sharing arrangements are, and we work with them individually on how, again, that data sharing takes place. For us, again, ownership is not as much of an issue. It's really access, and then what are we going to do with that data once we have access to it? Again, because of the way our technology is designed, we know every surgical procedure, where it takes place, when it takes place, what facility. So we have the ability to go back and track all of that information on our data if it's needed, if it helps, particularly as we think about regulatory clearance for future solutions. We'll have all of the provenance of our data because of the way our technology is designed.
And you are regulated, Tamir, you're not. So the FDA, how much does it ask from a data quality, design freeze? Can you update the model after more data is generated?
Yeah, I mean, I think the FDA is going through this journey right now, and there's early guidance on what it's going to look like. I think they're also still learning with all of the technology companies. I think, it'll depend on what you're doing with the data. How aggressive are the solutions? Is it informational? Is it giving information? Is it actually making recommendations? Is it generating conclusions? I think all of that, the level at which that data is being leveraged is going to dictate how much traceability there needs to be in the data and what you can actually show in terms of diversity of data sets.
So in my experience in terms of the customers of wanting to see the data, the reports, they were not shy. They were like, I want to see this, I want to see that, I want, and almost like just a lot. They wanted to see a lot of data output, which is exciting, but then as a corporation, you have to decide, can we do all that? Because it's a lot of expense, if you will, and there's typically, you do not get reimbursed for that sort of additive feature in a robot or a program, unfortunately.
So in my experience, no one gives about the data. They don't care about it. They want to see value and they want to see insights. So what they want to see is how they can do better. How can they be better? They want you to crunch it for them. They want you to make it actionable for them. They want to see what the value is. So I think there are several layers. The very base layer of everything is, just to surface information and to visualize it. So in the example that I gave you before about an enterprise the system that has no idea why one is doing better than the other, just seeing initial data, that doesn't mean anything for them. What they really want to have is insights into, all right, what are best practices here that are not being adhered to here? How can we transfer them from one place to another? I think that's where the real value is. So the conversation, I think, I'm trying to take it there. You're trying to pull me down to data. I'm trying to take the conversation to, all right, data is the base layer of everything. All right, cool. But how do we take that, make it actionable, make it valuable? And then we can start having a conversation about monetizing stuff. Because I've got a lot of data, cool. But if I can't do anything with it and doesn't provide value, no one's going to pay for it. So I think that needs to be the centerpiece of.
The only point I would make, though, is that I think hospitals are a little spooked right now around their data, right? And so knowing that technology companies are collecting data from the facility, I'm not sure all hospitals have figured out what does that mean for them. Do they want to control and own all of that? Are they going to give access freely? We're finding there's different tolerance at different facilities. And at the end of the day, it is the insights and the solutions that come out of the data that's of value. The data itself is not necessarily the critical point, but hospitals are, I think, spooked about
So
that
do you need to be
ownership.
on-premise, so it can be a cloud-based solution?
We were not allowed to be a cloud-based solution.
Cloud.
No, we could only have a closed system.
It's 2023, dude. There's no on-prem.
Still have a USB on your...
No. Everything is going to the cloud. It's...
And the hospitals are comfortable with that?
The hospitals are starting to get comfortable with it because they understand that, especially with everything that's happening and all the hacking, that cloud is a lot more secure than anything they have on-prem. But then again, you have someone who's responsible for information security and they have post-it notes with the password to their computer. I've seen it on multiple occasions at various hospitals. It's hilarious.
So do you all have to sign a BAA with the hospital?
Yes.
And so then what does the BAA say? It says they own the data, you have access to the data, it has to be anonymized?
The BAA just pushes all the responsibility to you. So I sign them happily and freely, and barely negotiate on me. I've got, HIPAA is but I've got high trust, I've got SOC 2 Type 2, I've got everything that I need in order to be able to deal with data. And most importantly, I have a culture in the company that deals religiously with all the information that we get. And so I feel very, very comfortable dealing with it. And it's it's data, that aspect of it is commoditized today. You've got EMRs, it's.
When did GPOs want to see that data when you were at a large orthopedic strategic to determine whether they're going to buy your implant or someone else's?
They did not ask for that, no. But they do want to partner with you, certainly. So HCA, for instance, they're very sort of technology forward, especially as it relates to going into the ASCs. And our robot specifically was, it was very suited for that. So I think they were starting to get there, but we were closed system, so I don't know how somebody would hack into our system. I mean, we were closed. A representative, one of my sales folks, had to go in with a special key and download the data.
Like a physical key?
Yep. Well, it was a special key, yeah. It was somebody couldn't just go and get it. So. Yeah. So I don't know.
2023.
2023.
Yeah.
Hopefully in 2023, yeah. I don't know.
Let's talk about faxes.
They do have faxes.
I still get faxes because someone has my fax.
There's a lot of data on a fax sheet.
Yeah. So we have 6 minutes. There's a clock here. Switching to business model a little bit without sharing any confidential information. How do you sell the product? How does hospital looking to buy it? Is it fee per client, per patient? Is it subscription? Meaning, what do you see the comfortable zone from the hospital? And Ali, what's your from your physician hat, right, of private practice? What will you pay
in terms
for?
of paying for data?
Yeah. Or the product that monetize the data, right? Because software product, hospitals are not, unless it's Epic, they don't like to pay for that.
I think that you have to demonstrate value, and you have to demonstrate user friendliness. If you come to a physician with like some user interface where I have to go find the data and it's not visually friendly, I'm gonna throw it away because I could care less. I don't have time. I'm busy, you know, I got stuff to do. Otherwise, legs are gonna get chopped off, or whatever bad thing is gonna happen in your specialty, right? And the click, it either has to create value, which means money, or it has to solve a pain, which is super annoying. Either one of those. You'll pay for getting rid of pain, or you'll pay to then make more money from the money you put in. But it has to be one of those two things. Otherwise, we're saturated, so many people, we don't care.
So if I come to you with a solution, right, do you need a pilot first before you start commercialize, or you rely on hospital A, B, and C that use that?
No, I think most hospitals are dysfunctional, and their deployment of anything is usually horrible. And so I could care less. I have a surgery center and a practice, and we're very efficient and fast turnaround, low cost. So I want to see it work for me, and I want to see it work on a relatively sizable N. I mean, I don't need an N of it. It depends what it is, obviously, but I need a big N. So I definitely need proof of concept. I also need to make sure that not only does it do the thing you say it's going to do, but it's going to integrate with the system. People are going to know how to use it. I'm not going to get phone calls from my nurses that are pissed off. Otherwise, it's gone.
So Manisha, how do you survive as a startup company that now it's death by pilot, right? That you have to do pilot and then convert them.
Yeah, I mean, that is, today that is, unfortunately, that's the challenge as a small company, right? We're bringing new technology into the world. You know, physicians want firsthand experience with it. They want to see the value in their specific operating room for their procedure. And it becomes a challenge as an organization. How do you scale that?
Medical sales cycle is slow.
Yes, and post-COVID even slower. But at the end of the day, I think you can leverage reference accounts. You leverage clinical data. You try to extrapolate from some experiences, make that broader so it becomes scalable. But that is always going to be sort of the challenge that you face.
You need a clinical champion.
Exactly.
Because doctors trust other doctors.
I just hate that because, you know, he'll always support you. At the end of the day, you have to go to the CFO, meet him 65 times, and then maybe you'll get that.
It depends where your sales cycle is, right? So like in the outpatient vascular space or in the ASC space, often the physician is owner-operator or at least decision maker, and you don't have to sell to a value committee, and you get in and you get out, and it's very, very quick and very efficient. So it really depends who the end customer is, and we have to remember like the hospital market is shrinking, and everything outpatient is growing. So that might change. I mean, like your robot was complicated, it's neurovascular stuff,
Right.
but if you're a software solution, and the doctors outpatient are the same ones in the hospital, and while the CEO may not listen, if you've got 100 doctors on staff and they're like, man, this thing is really great in my office, that's sort of the Trojan horse
To get it in, yeah.
That makes sense. So, final notes, any advice, it's a free-for-all, right? Advice to a company that wants to start, where do you start the data? Sad story, funny story, good story of data? Want to go and share anything? Nothing? I have to start?
Well, so, I mean, one point I can add, and for us specifically as Activ, we have been successful in monetizing data to this point. As I mentioned earlier, we're really looking at the data, what insights we can gain and solutions we can create. But we've partnered with NVIDIA. They've been very interested in our data sets because they're proprietary, high quality, and they've actually licensed those data sets from us. So while that's not our primary focus as an organization and our business model, that is something that we've had success doing to date because of the quality of the data.
So I'll ask, so Gwen, when you look at company on data, how do you evaluate them as an investor right now?
Investor, yeah. So it's really monetization, right? So being able to show that you can go deep and into a system and then measure the adoption. So really understanding revenue per sales rep, right? So that's key on an annualized basis. And then intellectual property not just being patents, but we all understand how quickly technology goes. So who's going to take you over, and and when will that happen, right? So can you build a moat around what you're doing? So that's really what would keep me up at night as an investor. And then the people is number one, right? Yeah. Yeah, so people is number one.
So I would go back to one of the things I said at the beginning. My tip for like any company or like founder is do not even think about that question. Like it's not about monetizing data. That is not the right question. It's about how do I monetize value? And if you focus on the value and if you focus on the patient and if you focus on what you're actually adding to this world, you'll be able to monetize it. If you focus on monetizing data, it's very short term and it's not going to work in my opinion.
Ali, anything?
I think that at the end of the day, if you're trying to monetize data, I think a lot of companies like Hims and Hers end up not doing so great. You got to get dirty in medicine if you want to make money. And so if you want to monetize the data, you need to have a patient touch point, right? So you've got a robot or you have a clinic. You don't have to have a lot of clinics. You can have a small footprint. But you have to, if you want to make the real bucks, you've got to get dirty. And so there needs to be some patient contact. It can't be, the cloud is awesome, but you can't cure anyone from the cloud.
Yeah, that's a good point, because at the end of the day, we're all here for the treating patient, making some money along the way, to be honest, to ourselves, but also to treat the patient. But I want to thank you all for joining, and hopefully it was a fun discussion, some lessons learned, and not too much challenges or problems to each one of us. But thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you.